Hi, my name is Trinity Carney, and I chose to do my paper over the history of Black entertainment with a focus on film and television. So I guess in this video, I'll kind of talk about why I chose the topic and I guess why I included certain films and bits of information that I did include. So I chose the topic for two reasons. One being I love film and television, and so I wanted to learn more about the Black side of it all. And two, because looking at all of the amazing accomplishments that Black filmmakers and actors are making today, I wanted to kind of see, where did we start at and how much farther do we have to go? Because, even though all of these amazing accomplishments are being made in Black film today, there's still the issue of representation and misrepresentation in certain films. So I talk a little bit in the beginning of my paper about theater and minstrel shows. So I included that because I wanted to talk about the first kind of accomplishment in modern entertainment for Black people, which would be the African Grove Theater. It would be the first Black theater troupe, and that was started by William Henry Brown in 1821. It didn't last long, but it was significant in the fact of it was this Black theater troupe. So I briefly talk about minstrelsies because at the time, after the Civil War, if Black people wanted to go into the entertainment industry, that was how they did it. They had to go and be in minstrel shows. And so there would be Black actors that would don blackface and would perform in these shows. A lot of times they would perpetuate the very negative stereotypes that white performers before them set in place. But you would also get Black performers such as Burt Williams and George Walker, who would incorporate political commentary in their shows to kind of show their white audiences like Black people are intelligent. So after that, I talk about, kind of the first in film, the first production company, the first all Black casted film, those kinds of things. So in the 1930s portion of the paper, I talk briefly about The Imitation of Life. And I included that specific version and not the 1959 version in the film, partially due to the history behind the leading actress. So Freddie Washington, the actress who plays the biracial character, she herself was biracial and she was white passing, but she wouldn't use this per se in real life because she felt inside herself that she was a Black woman, and so she didn't want to use that privilege that she kind of inherently had because of the color of her skin to get further. And I thought that was very interesting because to me personally, it talked about the integrity of her character, I'm pretty sure she could have gone very far had she chose to kind of ignore her Black lineage like some famous white actors would do with their Spanish and, non-white ethnic background that they would have. But she chose not to do that and to, instead embrace that side of herself, regardless of the fact that it wasn't shown, visually. So I thought that was a very interesting thing about the film. Due to paper length constraints, I wasn't able to talk about, all of the amazing Black actors and actresses of yesterday and of today. And so I figured I would talk about a couple of them that I've considered to be important here. one of them being Cicely Tyson. She got her start in the 1940s, and she's been acting since. And she's done performances on Broadway. She's done performances in film and in television. And I think she's important, not just because she was a Black woman in film in the 40s, but because she has seen the flip of Black film and Black entertainment, and how it went from being geared towards white people to really catering towards the Black audience. And she was one of the first Black female actresses from the 1950s that I was introduced to. So she has 3 Daytime Emmys, I believe an honorary Academy Award. She has a Tony. She's she has a lot of accolades, and she's been in films and television shows like How to Get Away with Murder and Diary of a Mad Black Woman by Tyler Perry, and The Help. You know, she's done a lot of film and a lot of television, so I thought it'd be nice to include her. So the next actor that I wanted to talk about was James Earl Jones. I included him briefly in the paper, but I couldn't really find a way to incorporate him deeper within the paper. So, I figure I'll talk about him a little bit here. So, he's also got a career spanning 70 years, and his career, I guess you could kind of consider it to be a little bit more iconic than Miss Cicely Tyson's, just because he's done a lot of across the board noticeable roles. He voiced Darth Vader, and he voiced Mufasa in The Lion King, and one film that I talked about, just a name in the paper, he was in Coming to America. And so he's in a lot of these films, not just Black, that have a lot of significance all over the world. I personally don't like Star Wars, but Star Wars is major, and the voice of Darth Vader is major. So he's just another important name in Black film and Black television. So one last thing that I wanted to touch on briefly in this video would be kind of why I chose to do the 70s, 80s, and 90s the way that I did. So 70s, 80s, and 90s saw a lot of Black film, and in regards to the 80s and 90s, a lot of Black television, and so much I couldn't incorporate it all. So I wanted to look at it, I guess you could say kind of from like a historical standpoint. I chose to include Blaxploitation because it is a genre of film and of Black film that is kind of overlooked when looking at film throughout the 70s. So I wanted to touch on that a little bit briefly. And, in doing so, because of paper length constraints, I couldn't talk about all of the, amazing films to come out of the 70s, such as The Wiz, which, while it was not a commercial success at the time, it's a beautiful film, and I think it's a great adaptation of The Wizard of Oz. I focused on the 80s the way that I did because, again, there were a lot of Black films and Black actors to come out of the 80s that I couldn't talk about. There was Morgan Freeman in Driving Miss Daisy. There was Lawrence Fishburne. There was Denzel Washington getting his start. There were a lot of Black actors and Black movies that came out, and so I kind of focused on Spike Lee just because he is a name that we see a lot in Black film and Black television today, and amongst the Black community we discuss and acknowledge how important he is to film and Black film as a whole, but he's kind of missed out when it comes to talking about black film in the 80s and 90s, just because his films were so interesting, to say the least. As you see when I talk about Do the Right Thing and the kind of white reaction to it. His films are really made for black consumption. I mean, they're for everybody. Film is for everyone, but you know, his films are for black people, made by black people. And the reason why I talked about the 90s the way that I did, because it's kind of hard to pick a 90s black film over top of the others, because you have so many that are deemed iconic within the black community, and so it's very hard to say these are the three that are the most important. And I picked Boys in the Hood and Waiting to Exhale because they told stories that up until that point may have been touched on, but they were not as deeply discussed as they were in the film. Up until that point, there had never really been a black film based on black women. In the 80s, you had, I believe it was called The Women of Brewster Place, but it showed kind of oppressed and impoverished black women. Whereas in Waiting to Excel, you have these accomplished black women who were just navigating life within, in their blackness and within their relationships. And that film, I feel, really opened the door for other films made focusing on black women, and also TV shows focusing on black women. For example, Girlfriends, which would come out in 2000. Which was another significant show for black women, because it's often considered, I believe, the black Sex in the City, because it's kind of got the same parallels. But it was significant because the black women in those in that show were successful and they were strong in their blackness. I chose to go over Boys in the Hood because, as I mentioned in the beginning of the paper, a topic that is often avoided early on in black film is, wanting to show the real lifeness of poverty. And early on we didn't really have gang violence, but those kind of themes, they wanted to show black people in positive lights and not what was shown in Boys in the Hood. So I consider it to be very, very important in black film and black television, because it showed this very real and very honest story of what it is like for young black boys in the 90s in a place as notorious as Crenshaw. And I think it really kind of set this point in black film for these stories to be made without a negative connotation, because you would see kind of like a lot of them in the 90s and the 2000s, and you see them today. And I talked about black television the way that I did because in the 90s, because those are, from what I can think of, the shows that I watch, the most important shows that I watched as a child. A Different World is known all over the black community as a film that really got black people, young black people, to want to go to college. It was obviously sensationalized, but it showed young, educated black people in this setting where they were being enlightened and enriched, and they were amongst their own, and it really motivated people to go to college. And I thought that was very cool that a TV show, seeing where we came and where we were at that point, that a TV show can motivate an entire generation of people to want to go into college. And I talked about living single, because it's often talked about today in comparison to Friends, because they were both promoted by Warner Bros. But Friends was always held to a higher standard in the sense of the promotion that it got. But it was an important Black show because it showed, once again, a group of Black people who were accomplished, who were just, you know, they were in their Blackness, they were Black people, but they were kind of just navigating life. The show wasn't centered on their Blackness per se. And so I thought that show was an important show to include. And then the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, because it kind of took what the Cosby Show had set in place of having this upper middle class family, and it took it to another level, you know? Up until that point, there hadn't been a rich Black family on television, and there weren't shows where it showed kind of the two different sides of Blackness, which exists today, where you have, you know, more privileged Black people, I guess, kind of want to call them, that have this particular upbringing that was, you know, they grew up in the suburbs and they had money. And then on the other hand, you had the Black community that grew up in impoverished neighborhoods. Up until that point, the idea of a Black family being on TV in a mansion had not been even thought of. So I thought it was very important and very imperative that I included that in my paper. So yeah, that was just a brief overview of some things that I didn't include in my paper and some reasons as to why I did. And I hope you enjoy reading the paper.